Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience.
Anything could be going on in the world, but passions were simmering in businessman John's mansion. And why the hell take responsibility for a child if you can't take care of it? Muttered a young woman with a pretty but unkind face. She was packing an 8-year-old girl for school, and you couldn't tell from her face that she was enjoying the process. Accidentally, or maybe on purpose, Selena pulled a strand of her hair in a dragon braid. "Careful," the girl asked, not very politely. Selena only rolled her eyes, and the elderly, half-paralyzed man lying on the bed sighed heavily. That sigh only added fuel to the fire, and the woman continued to rant. "Do you think I need this? No, you don't. You take care of her yourself, or you'll be lying in a stake. And I have to run around you." "Selena, I understand," John said quietly, "but the girl needs a mother's affection, and I can barely walk." The old man sighed again. There was so much sadness and hopelessness in that sigh that it seemed that a stone would shake, but not Selene's heart, if she had one, of course. Selena was the second daughter-in-law of John, a well-known businessman in town, and the wife, or rather, now widow, of his son Jacob, his son's first wife. Anna was a kind, calm, friendly woman. John did not remember Anna being in a bad mood. She was a housekeeper, but she was by no means a typical kitchen cleaner in a greasy bathrobe and a nest on her head. The house was in exemplary order and there was always hot food. Anna looked as if she had stepped out of a housewares advertisement. Anna died in childbirth. The inconsolable widower didn't want to live, but he still had little Julia. That's who was worth living for. The young father took care of his daughter as best he could, but John said from time to time, "You should meet a nice woman. Julia needs a mother. She's a girl. And boys don't need a mother." Jacob grinned sadly. "Boys need a mother too," he agreed, "but girls need a mother more." Jacob realized that too, but it wasn't easy to find a woman willing to take care of someone else's child, and yet there was one. Selena was nothing like Anna, but she was undoubtedly beautiful too. But unlike Jacob's first wife, she wasn't a very good housekeeper, and her temper wasn't very good. And that was putting it mildly. If Anna could enjoy any little thing, Selena, on the contrary, was always dissatisfied. Jacob and Selena were in the same class, and they liked each other during their school years. After high school, as it usually happens, their paths diverged. But it so happened that fate brought them together again. One day, after negotiations in a business hotel, Jacob decided to have lunch at his favorite restaurant, which was located on the basement floor. The young entrepreneur entered the restaurant, and the first thing that caught his eye was a luxurious waterfall of silky golden blonde hair. A few seconds later, Jacob saw the face of its owner. "Selenka," he exclaimed, seeing his high school sweetheart. "What a reunion." "Jacob." Selena smiled, gracefully holding out her hand to him. "How many years, how many winters?" "Many, Selena, many. You look great. What are you doing here?" "This is my friend's restaurant. She invited me here. She should be here any minute. And let me guess, you were at the negotiation." "You're not psychic, are you?" Jacob laughed. Selena said, smiling, "It's really quite simple. All the businessmen of the city come here after business negotiations. Well, as for you, Billy Smirnoff told me that you're in business, so it's not hard to make the comparison." "Well, yes," he nodded and, obeying a sudden impulse, suggested, "Celine, why don't I see you sometime? How about dinner at a restaurant?" "What an idiot," he chided himself. "Who told you she was single? Such a beauty." However, Selena agreed to meet, and the former classmates exchanged phone numbers. They met a couple days later, and when Jacob told Selena about his widowhood, the ex-lover just shook her head. "Poor you, I can only imagine what you've been through. I'm divorced." Jacob asked his ex to dance, and Selena laughed softly. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing's wrong," she smiled. "I just remembered when you asked me to dance in the 10th grade and kicked me in the legs." Jacob couldn't take it anymore and laughed. "I've been dancing ever since, thank God. I've noticed. You're a really good dancer." "Well, it's the position, isn't it?" That dinner was the beginning of their relationship, which eventually turned into a legal marriage. Selena, though faithfully attending to Julia, kept the little girl at a distance. At first, the girl had been drawn to her, but the young woman was determined not to allow any callow tenderness. Jacob was offended by this, but deep down he knew that it was impossible to make someone else's child love him. Not every man was capable of it anyway, so Jacob was grateful to Selena for taking care of his princess as best she could. A year after the wedding, Jacob died in a car accident. He bequeathed all his assets to Julia. In the event of his death before the adulthood of his daughter, Jacob's property was to be managed by Selena, who he appointed as Julia's guardian. This arrangement suited the young widow just fine. She stayed in John's house and represented the interests of the orphan girl. Selena was confused only one thing. When her stepdaughter turned 18, all the worldly goods would pass to her. Selena had been smart enough not to show her dislike for her stepdaughter when Jacob was alive. But after Jacob's death, she didn't bother. Selena often called Julia a spooner. The stepmother's lack of love was compensated for by John's love. But Selena was ready to glare at the little girl as soon as the old man turned his back. In time, Julia began to respond to the evil stepmother in the same way, but thick-skinned Selena did not care. So what a malicious little brat. John adored his granddaughter, such a little one, and she's already been through so much, the old man thought, and his heart burst with pity, first her mother, then her father. And this snake hisses at her, thinking that I do not notice anything. John spoiled Julia in every way he could. He took her to the park, children's caves, shopping, and entertainment centers, and did it with great pleasure. But unfortunately, a few months ago, John had a car accident, as a result of which he almost lost the ability to walk normally and became ill. After the old man was discharged from the hospital, Julia spent almost all the time in his room. In fact, everything is not so hopeless, assured the doctor. Your body will recover. But given your age, it will take time. I can't rule out the possibility of surgical intervention. All in all, it's not that bad. But what kind of treatment can we talk about when the daughter-in-law was eating Julia with a hateful look? Leaving the girl alone with Selena would be pure madness. Who knows what her sister-in-law might think? John, despite his unenviable position, ran the business by phone and internet. All issues requiring the direct presence of the head, the businessman entrusted the manager Harry, who, by the way, readily joined the case. John was not left with the feeling that he had been waiting for this moment. When Jacob's death was only a few months old, Julia didn't quite understand what had happened. She waited every day for her daddy to come back. But daddy never came back, and Julia grew up and realized that it would never happen. Selena, why don't you like Julia so much? John asked me one day. Why does she always stick her nose where it doesn't belong? Selena grumbled and suddenly stopped talking. The older man raised his eyebrows in surprise, but said nothing. He understood. The reason for dislike for the girl money, which daughter-in-law can dispose of only for the time being. But there was something else. Julia couldn't do math, and she always came home from school dissatisfied. Betty said I was useless, her granddaughter complained. John frowned. Telling a child that she is useless is uneducational, to say the least. By the way, the daughter-in-law worked as an accountant and, according to her, received a diploma with honors. So, maybe? Oh, no, please. Selena waved her hands. Well, what kind of math teacher am I? I've already forgotten everything. Well, you'll remember at the same time. And I need it, thought the daughter-in-law. She was not at all smiling to do math with her 8-year-old stepdaughter. And then there are tutors for that. That's what we'll dance from, Selena realized. John, but a tutor will do a much better job than me, she said. The father-in-law looked at his daughter-in-law carefully and thought she was probably right. John took everything about his beloved granddaughter seriously. And the question of Julia's education was one of the most important to him. That's right, he reasoned. I'd only got one granddaughter, so why trust her to someone professional? And yet there were doubts. Hiring a tutor is, first of all, letting a stranger into the house. Who knows what's on his mind? John, I beg you, said the daughter-in-law with a grin, afraid that the old man might change his mind. He'll do it. Do you really think the agency will keep thieves and other trash? When John went to the agency, he asked the agency for questionnaires of all the applicants in the field he was interested in. As a bedridden invalid, he didn't have time to go to all those agencies. "What is this nonsense?" Selena muttered, annoyed. She had noticed many times that things in the house were always out of place. Once a young woman had hung a blouse on the back of a chair, and when she had decided to move it to the closet, she had found it missing. The first thing Selena saw when she opened the closet was the blouse. It was like a poltergeist at work. She shook her head. Another time, a good half of the cutlets were missing from the skillet. A fresh loaf of bread, bought after work, had been cut off while Selena was taking a bath. Sometimes she had some suspicion, but the young woman brushed it aside for some reason. "Maybe I'm just tired," she decided. John studied the resumes of tutors for elementary school students. His intuition had helped the old man in critical situations more than once. One glance at a photo of an applicant was enough to realize whether or not that tutor was a good fit for his granddaughter. Having rejected a couple of dozen potential math teachers for Julia, John sighed heavily, thinking that they were not all serious, and these were teachers. With only 5 applicants left, John decided to moderate his pickiness, and when he lost all hope of finding a tutor for his favorite, he suddenly liked Angelica, a very young girl. Not 18, of course, but a fresh and youthful enough face. A recent graduate, most likely, John thought, and after reading the questionnaire of the applicant, he was convinced that he was right. The girl had indeed graduated from the math department of the university in the last academic year. On the photo, Angelica, unlike the other applicants, looked quite modest, her blonde hair slicked back, no makeup or jewelry. The girl's profile was at the very end of the list. An outsider, Mickey mentally summarized, and no references. Although where would they come from if she's straight out of university? The businessman caught himself defending the girl. For some inexplicable reason, the elderly businessman really liked her picture. Besides, John always liked to give to people who needed to get a grip on at least some opportunity. He had been one himself, so John wrote to Angelica. She wrote back about 5 minutes later. I'm sure she stayed on her computer waiting for a reply. Because of her lack of references, Angelica was willing to work for a piece of bread and a bowl of soup. According to the applicant, she was in dire need of money. Her fiancé needed a good lawyer. A good lawyer, John chuckled to himself. Working for food is hardly the way to raise money for a good lawyer. I wish I could see her for myself, this miracle of nature. Money for a lawyer for the groom. Despite his ironic thoughts, John already had a lot of respect for Angelica. Pretty's intuition told the businessman, this girl is what he needs. Among other things, in the column additional skills was indicated that she plays the violin, which finally won the heart of the elderly businessman. The thing is that in this respect, Angelica was close to him in spirit. When then, a long time ago, John went to music school and even in all seriousness dreamed of a career as a musician. But unfortunately, the situation in the country did not dispose to it. Another computer chirp, which meant a new message from an interested applicant, did not allow him to recollect. Angelica wrote that she was willing to meet at any time convenient for John. Well, here in glorious, thought John, and not thinking long, offered the girl to come to his home. When Angelica saw the elderly man bedridden, she felt uneasy. Don't worry, you won't have to carry the ducks for me, he winked, intercepting the girl's gaze. I didn't think anything of the sort, Angelica replied, embarrassed. John nodded and began the interview. Julia entered the room. After about 10 minutes, the girl whispered something in the old man's ear, and then he said, You are accepted. Really? Rejoiced Angelica, but you've asked almost nothing yet. Really, John assured her, and smiling he added, Consider that the chief warden has approved your candidacy. So from tomorrow, you can start work. Angelica faithfully performed tutoring duties in the house John and Julia in her soul did not like. She enjoyed every minute she spent with her teacher. This child definitely needs love, Angelica stated. Julia reached out to her like a flower to the sun, and the girl reciprocated. Grandfather, said Julia one day at dinner, I want Angelica to live with us. Can we? Selena snorted, but John inquired, Angelica, would you really move in with us? I don't even know, the tutor muttered embarrassedly, Is that convenient? I'll say more, John smiled. It would be more convenient for everyone. You wouldn't have to spend money on transportation. Meals are on the inviting party. Selena shook her head disapprovingly, but no one paid any attention to her. It wasn't enough for her to eat at the sick man's bedside, but the old fool wanted to put up another sponsor. Whom am I to be fed by you? Angelica was finally embarrassed, as if she had overheard the thoughts of her employer's daughter-in-law. Well, you can contribute to the food supply, said John, remembering the girl's words that she was ready to work for food. Go for it. You won't regret it. But I have my own apartment. That's great, smiled the businessman. You can rent it out. I think, in your situation, additional income will not be superfluous. It's true, thought Angelica. How could I not have thought of it before? Thus, the question of the tutor living in John's house was resolved positively. One day, John called the tutor, as he put it, just for a chat. Since you're living in my house, it wouldn't be a bad idea to get to know each other, would it? Well, yes, Angelique smiled. Angelique, if I recall correctly, you play the violin? Yes, she nodded. Would you play something for me? Really? Exclaimed the girl. The last time I picked up an instrument was 2 years ago. Angelica, I assure you, it doesn't matter, assured the businessman. Your hands will remember everything. I also want Angelica to play the violin, said Julia, who had already managed to climb onto her grandfather's bed. Well, please. The tutor was reluctant, but she took the violin and began to play a tune. John suddenly felt hot. It was a very beautiful and sad melody. From the very first chords, it touched the heart, and the old man's heart shrank. And after a minute, John clearly realized that the melody was familiar to him. At first, the entrepreneur even thought he was having an auditory hallucination. No, it just can't be, John thought, realizing somewhere that it could be. The melody enveloped his whole being, and then smoothly picked up and transported him back to a time when John was still young and full of hope. Many years ago, as an 8th grader, John decided to devote his life to music, but life made its own adjustments. After school, he entered the conservatory, but did not pass the competition and fell under the fall draft. After the army, John again decided to try his luck. By the time of his return from the army, in the city opened a new music school. The guy applied there, and this time he succeeded. Moreover, John graduated from the school with honors, but decided not to stop there and applied to the conservatory. The diploma with honors did its job, and yesterday's graduate of the music school noticed. Teachers said that he had a real talent. John was not the only student endowed with talent. There was also Mallory, the girl he fell in love with. By the way, John honestly thought she was more talented than he was. Or did it seem that way to the young man because he was in love? At the evening of awarding diplomas, John confessed his love to Mallory, and the young people began to meet. They decided that they would get married in some wooden country church. All friends wondered when the wedding would take place, but the lovers were not destined to marry. Everyone John knew was sure he was going to be a star, but promotion cost a lot of money, which he didn't have. Perestroika struck, and the 90s came. There were many unsuccessful attempts to find a permanent job in his specialty, but all failed. John planned to talk seriously about marriage, but he felt guilty. What could he offer Mallory besides his love? John worked part-time in restaurants, gambled in the crosswalk, and money was in and out. Why are you fooling around? His school friend Alexander told him once, you can't live on music nowadays. Come and join us. You'll earn money for your wedding, and you'll have enough to live on. Sabrina and I went on vacation in Turkey a week ago, and if you work for us, you'll be able to afford such a trip. What can I say? The offer was tempting. And indeed, thought John, it would be nice to fly with Mallory to Turkey or somewhere else. I'll surprise her. Alexander worked in a rapidly growing firm selling audio, video, and home appliances, which in those years actively imported from abroad, and his business was booming. A school friend put in a good word for John, and the management never once regretted that they gave a chance to a graduate musician who was out of business. Truth be told, John didn't like the business that much, but it was the business that allowed John to survive in those difficult times. But as it turned out, Mallory thought otherwise. It would seem that nothing can interfere with their happiness, but the favorite girl turned out to be unusually principled. "Oh, John, you buried your talent in the ground," sadly stated her beloved. "Yes, I did not bury anything," John objected. "Now everyone survives as they can." "Business is so dirty," sighed Mallory. "Let me disagree with you. Yes, business is not creative, it's routine. But let's look at it from a different angle. Traveling abroad and useful acquaintances with foreign partners, well, isn't it a tempting prospect? I'll save up for the wedding and we'll have the ultimate party. Is that bad?" "John, I don't care what our wedding will be," she said fervently. "The main thing is that we'll be together. We'll devote our lives to art and travel all over the world." "With what money?" John grinned bitterly. "And then you see who is now prosperous and can afford all the goods of the earth. Businessmen. My uncle, the historian, assures me that the situation in the country will get better soon. And not only businessmen will be able to afford trips abroad. We just have to be patient." "Why should I be patient?" It seems that for the first time in their relationship, he started to turn on. "Why, tell me? Why live badly when you can live well?" You shook your head regretfully. "You haven't understood anything." "I don't get it," said John. And Mallory just turned around and walked away. He, of course, made attempts to reconcile, but his beloved was adamant. "Mallory does not want to see me," in despair said John Sashka. Young Green grinned. "Friend, in your Mallory is still alive youthful maximalism, but it passes. Love is love, but man is an earthly creature, and he needs food and clothing. So my friend, I hope we have some more wedding salads." Alexander turned out to be a bad visionary. The salads didn't work out that way. At least not at John and Mallory's wedding, who was adamant. Then one day John decided, "After all, I have my pride too." The couple eventually broke up. Eventually, as John got involved in the business, he realized that he was doing something not so boring. After working for the company for 3 years, John decided to start his own business. He succeeded. As for marriage, it happened much later. His wife Victoria was a very beautiful woman, but over time John realized that he and she could not become each other's kin. There was no warmth in the soul. On top of that, Victoria could not get pregnant for a long time. At the service of the wealthy couple were the most famous doctors in the United States, but the stars were clearly not on their side. "Unfortunately, we are not gods," divorced Barry, one of the best capital gynecologists. And then John's wife decided to resort to unconventional medicine. What the hell? They bypassed several fortune tellers, but they could not please them. John and Victoria did not give up, and eventually their patience was rewarded. Their attempts at parenthood had succeeded. It was a good witch doctor, or nature finally took mercy on the couple. But one day Victoria proudly announced to her husband that he would become a father. John was then already 39, his wife a year less. Despite the birth of a long-awaited son, a few years later the spouses of John divorced. John, being a generous and noble man, determined ex-spouse for life maintenance. But Mallory, he never saw him again. There were rumors that his Zasnova went to another city. Sometimes the elderly businessman thought that it was necessary to give in to Mallory, or better yet, find a compromise. Although what was there to say about it now? The melody awakened memories in the elderly man, long ago hidden in a far corner and locked on 7 locks, memories, and for good reason. After all, the author of the melody, which played Angelica, was the same girl from the past. He could not be mistaken. How does Angelique know that tune? Wondered John. Angelica is quite young, but Mallory must be in her 60s. What if she's my daughter? No, it doesn't add up. She's a recent university graduate, and Mallory and I broke up much earlier. John didn't even realize he was crying right away. "Grandpa, why are you crying?" Julia asked when the tune ended. "Are you sick?" No, John smiled through his tears. "On the contrary, I feel very good." "Angelica, please answer me one question. How do you know this tune?" "I learned it from a very good music teacher. I was referred to her by the orphanage. Mallory taught me the basics. By the way, she and I are still friends." Angelica smiled and added sadly, "And also me and Vanya, her son, was engaged. That is, we were engaged, but..." Mallory. Now John was sure. The mysterious music teacher could well be his first bride. However, There was no such thing as 100% certainty. How many women in the world have the name Mallory? After all, if his former fiancée taught music, it is quite logical that she could teach this tune to anyone. So the businessman decided to make the gentlest possible inquiries about her tutor. Yes, I remember, you said. John nodded and moved on to the subject at hand. She was a very nice woman indeed. Well, if you're engaged to her son. Very nice. Angelique nodded with a smile. It was a pity she was in serious trouble. Her son is in prison and her grandson has been sent to an orphanage. Mallory tried to defend him, but she was rejected because of his age. So your fiancé is in trouble with the law? Mickey asked sympathetically. No, Angelica sighed. It's not like that. Well, how? The businessman needed maximum information, so he clarified everything, down to the smallest detail. In the end, John learned that the daughter-in-law of supposedly his former lover turned out to be a cuckoo. She gave birth to a son, Archie, and left him for her husband, that is, Evan. The spouses divorced, and a year later Evan met Angelica. Young people dreamed of getting married, but something happened that they did not expect. Evan worked as a security guard at a meat processing plant, and one day saw something that was not meant for his eyes. 5 men, led by the plant manager, were loading pork and beef carcasses into a truck. Eventually, the robbery was pinned on Evan. Allegedly, he was the tipster and was directly involved in the theft. Evan's a tipster, the tutor grinned sadly, but he wouldn't have taken the wad of bills in front of him. Once he and I were walking along the promenade and found a purse full of large bills. So he literally asked every passerby if he had lost the wallet. The old man was shocked. Yes, he said thoughtfully, it would be funny if it were not so sad. Angelica, I have a strange request for you. Would you mind bringing this woman to me? John, said the girl timidly, with all my respect for you, I don't think it's very convenient at the moment. Mallory is hardly in the mood for visits at the moment. Well, really? I don't mean to be intrusive, but this is very important to me, John insisted. I understand. Angelica nodded with a slight smile, but maybe sometime later. I don't think there could be a better time. What's more, I think I can help her. Angelica, it's a matter of life and death. Well, if it's a matter of life and death, the girl could not resist a smile, this time wide and sincere. Angelica, either you tell me what's what or no visit, said Mallory. Who is he, this mysterious patron? Does he have a name? The tutor faltered. John had asked Angelica not to give his name. She respected the man and was determined to do as he asked. But on the other hand, Mallory really wasn't going anywhere. The woman was still as principled as she had been years ago. All right, the girl decided. He'd actually asked not to be named. So, you'll? I understand, smiled the music teacher. Let it be our little female secret. So who is he? John. The name struck Mallory like a whip. No, more like a flash of lightning. Wow, I thought I'd forgotten about him, the older woman thought. Angelica, the older woman said in a squeezed voice. Well, I'll go and see your employer. Older, like me, a little better, but still the same eyes, thought John, looking at Mallory. And suddenly, in place of the staid old woman appeared a young graduate of a music school with burning eyes. Well, hello, Mallory. John greeted the one who really turned out to be his former fiancée. Good afternoon, John, she smiled. John thought the businessman fondly, just like back then. Angelica, realizing that these two were obviously not just good acquaintances, delicately left the room. Well, tell me, what do you live? What do you breathe? John smiled back. Me? Retired, but still teaching. Strangely enough, I still get students. What's so strange about that? I always knew you were talented. You are too, but... Mallory was awkwardly silent, but her former lover understood everything and continued with a smile. I remember, I buried my talent in the ground. God knows, Mallory not once scolded himself for his integrity, from which did not work out in the second marriage. She caught her husband with a mistress and couldn't forgive. John don't, shook her head. The old woman, do you think I've never regretted it? And now here we are. Oh God. Mallory suddenly cried bitterly. Mallory, what's wrong? John asked worriedly. Angelica told me that you have problems. Trouble. The woman sobbed. It's a disaster. But it's really not his fault. Evan is not capable of such a thing. Olga, tell me everything in order, John asked softly. Seriosa, I spell you, exclaimed Mallory. If you really have the ability, help him. After all, this is your son too. At first, John did not even immediately understand what his ex-fiancée told him. What son? And when he realized the meaning of what was said, the older man looked at Mallory in amazement. He is my son, John slowly said. That is, when we broke up with you? The elderly musician found it difficult to speak, and she only nodded frequently. Yes, John, repented Mallory. I was expecting a child from you, but I found out about it later, and you kept silent all that time. Yes, she said through her tears, I'm sorry. It's all because of my stupid principle. What is there to say about it now? John said bitterly, tears welling up in his eyes. I'll definitely help Ivan. After all, I owe him, and a lot. My fault, the ex-fiancé said quietly. It doesn't matter, John replied with a sigh, holding out his hand to her. Despite his helpless position, John quickly got the right people involved and took care of the matter. Are you sure everything will be all right? He asked his lawyer, and after hearing the answer, he sighed in relief and passed out. There was a knock at the door of his room. Come in. His sister-in-law entered the room. Frankly speaking, in the light of recent events, John had forgotten about her. Selena was always away, which he was glad of. When her sister-in-law was home, however, she rarely visited Mickey, only when absolutely necessary. So when she came in, his father-in-law inquired, Is something the matter? You could say that. The young woman nodded. John, frankly, I don't like what's going on. What's going on? He asked, puzzled. At least this tutor's accommodation, Selena snorted. It's like a passable courtyard, honestly. You've got people running around, and you're taking care of them. Selena, but it's my house and my money, John said reasonably. I don't recognize you, she shook her head. Where is your healthy pragmatism? Pragmatism, but sometimes you need to think about the soul, said father-in-law. About the soul, Selena grinned. There is no soul. In our time. It depends on who's doing what. Selena, I've decided to start treatment. Treatment? She exclaimed. Why? What do you mean why? It's not good for a man to be helpless. And I'm still a go. I can do a lot of things. And I think it's a waste of money. Stood on his daughter-in-law. You are no longer young, and the process of recovery may be delayed, if it ever does. It's worth a try. Besides, the doctor said there's hope. I beg you. She rolled her eyes. They'll say anything in the hope of getting as much money as possible. Well, he's not some bullshit charlatan. He's a respected man. They're all respectable, but when it comes to money, their principles are just a memory. Selena, why did you come here? Did John say you wanted to talk trash to me? Well, why so bad? Objected daughter-in-law. Of course, not a gift, but not to such an extent. By the way, we are talking about the money that your granddaughter will inherit. Saying that, Celine turned around and walked regally out of the room. Money, grinned the businessman to himself. My money is enough for 10 lifetimes. She cares for Julia, of course she does. And then Angelica and Julia came in, and it seemed to the old man that the sun had peeked into his room, in spite of the overcast weather. Girls, I want to consult with you, John said. We are listening to you carefully, Julia said importantly. I want to start the treatment, he said. That's great, said the girl. Will you walk again? Well, I hope so, smiled John, although some people think it's a waste of money. Angelica realized it was about his sister-in-law, but chose to remain silent. After all, it was none of her business. Julia asked, Who's counting? Selena? How perceptive she is, thought the tutor. She is, nodded John. Don't listen to her, exclaimed the granddaughter. She's a very unkind woman. But Selena cares for you, doesn't she? She doesn't care. She just hisses like a snake. I hate her. And Harry hates her too. What's Harry got to do with this? Grandfather was surprised. Julia didn't understand the meaning of the expression, what has he got to do with it? So she limited herself to saying that the manager was a bad man. We'll find out who is bad and who is good, muttered John and added louder. Angelica, how are Mallory and her son? Everything is fine, smiled the girl. Evan took Nikita from the orphanage, got a new job, and proposed to me. Well, congratulations. Thank you, John. Thank you for everything. We really appreciate it. You're leaving us now? Julia was sad. And who will teach you math? Angelica winked at her student. Also true, as an adult, replied the girl. Angelica came to John's house earlier than Julia returned from school and decided to wait on the cozy terrace lined with flowers. The tutor sat down at a table under the awning. And then her attention was attracted by voices that appeared to be coming from the pantry. Can you imagine? The old marasmatic has decided to start treatment. The girl heard Selena's tragic voice. Well, he's not that old, and especially not a marasmatic. But you're a clever girl, answered a man's voice, which, as far as Angelica knew, belonged to the manager John. When she had first seen him, he had seemed a slippery fellow. I hope you'll be able to talk him out of the treatment, the manager said after a brief pause. The tutor crept to the storeroom and, holding her breath, carefully pulled the smartphone out of her purse and pressed the recorder button. You know, we need the old man helpless, the manager continued, so you'll do your best. Besides, he's bound to find out that we've caused your husband's accident. Angelica covered her mouth with her hand in horror. Hush, Selena hissed, and she remembered how Julia had compared her to a snake with ears. I'm motivating you, Harry grinned. What a motivator, giggled John's sister-in-law, after which the tutor heard the sounds of kissing, intermittent breathing, and passionate whispering. Angelica had no desire to eavesdrop on their antics, and the girl hurried over to Mickey. What is it then? Thought the tutor. This Selena pretending to be a decent stepmother, representing her stepdaughter's interests, while she herself is robbing Mickey without remorse and spending his money with her lover. And that manager is good too. Angelica knew that her son John had been killed in a car accident, and apparently she was the one in question. It suddenly occurred to the girl what the lovers had set up the accident for, most likely for the purpose of further eliminating John Sr. as well. Oh, mama, horrified the tutor. So it was they who set up the accident, and John and Juliet could be in danger too. At the thought of a student who had already suffered enough, Angelica felt completely creeped out. No, I just have to tell John everything. It's a good thing I made a tape, she thought. Angelica, is something wrong? John asked the tutor. Your face is gone. I have, she sighed, but not me, you. I don't understand. Angelica took out her phone and turned on the tape recorder. John listened to the conversation and, to the girl's amazement, laughed out loud. Well, that was to be expected, he said, wiping away tears. Selenka. Well, I never liked her, but we'll see who's who. Me too, thought Angelica. She remembered what Julia had said about the manager, and for the umpteenth time marveled at her childish intuition. After all, it is not for nothing they say that the mouth of a child speaks the truth. You are not afraid? Asked the girl. After all, you. She was embarrassed, and John asked with a smile, You mean an invalid? I'm not offended. Besides, the old man was meaningfully silent and got up from the bed. So you? From shock, Angelica could not utter another word. Yes, Angelica. John spread his hands. I'm not paralyzed. That is, I was, but the body, as predicted by the doctors, recovered on its own, without any surgery. I deliberately played this play to put the vigilance of my enemies to sleep. It's clear that my son was deliberately eliminated, but I didn't know who did it. There were several suspects. I eliminated one by one, leaving Selena and Harry. By the way, why don't you get them for me? Both of them. John's sister-in-law and the manager opened their mouths at the sight of John on his feet. Surprised? Now get out, both of you. I suppose you can guess why. I don't know what you mean, Selena said firmly. You don't? You don't? I don't advise you to deny it. There's a tape recording. A tape of what? Her sister-in-law exclaimed indignantly. Angelica, please turn on the tape, John asked the tutor, and seeing that Angelica hesitated, added, Don't be afraid, you won't be in any danger. They can't help but realize that if something happens to you, it'll be clear whose handiwork it is. Angelica turned on the tape, and Selena, hearing her own voice, gave the tutor a hateful look. Did you think I'd let you rob my own granddaughter and stain my son's memory? John asked icily, noticing the look on his daughter-in-law's face. Selena preferred to keep silent, and the former father-in-law looked at her squeamishly and said stiffly, "Anyway, dear bride, you have 10 minutes to pack. You are allowed to stay in the house, and you shit right under my nose. I won't tolerate such ingratitude, I'm sorry. Well, you, dear Harry, are fired. I'm sure you'll never see a place like this again. Leave this house immediately and forget about it. I'll see you in court." Having got rid of his enemies, John breathed a sigh of relief and asked Angelica, "Do not you find that with their departure it even breathes easier?" The girl smiled. She was in complete agreement with her employer. As Selena was leaving the house, rolling out a crocodile skin suitcase, the driver brought Julia home. Realizing what was going on, the overjoyed girl flew into the house, not even realizing that another pleasant surprise was waiting for her. "Grandpa, did you kick Selena out?" she exclaimed happily, and when she saw John sitting on his bed, she opened her mouth in surprise. "I did, sweetie," he nodded. "Grandfather, can you walk? Why didn't you say anything?" "It was necessary," John answered, and holding his granddaughter close to him, repeated, "It was necessary." "Cool," smiled Julia. "And now you'll take me to the park again." "I will. And in fact, now we'll live better than ever. By the way, Julia's vacation is soon, and we can go to the sea. How about it?" The girl laughed with relief and answered, "I'm all for it. Will Angelica come with us?" "Absolutely. And we'll take Evan and Archie with us. We're a family now." "Yay!" Julia screamed. The girl had already had time to get acquainted with Nikita and adored the boy. What is there? She sincerely considered him her little brother. It would seem that all the vicissitudes remained far behind. Selena and Harry received 10 years in prison each, and thus, good has triumphed over evil. But it seems a quiet old age is not about John. A few days later, he received a phone call from a woman he didn't know. "Hello, John," she greeted the businessman and introduced herself. "My name is Maria. I represent the interests of your ex-wife, Victoria." Hearing the ex-wife's name, John was taken aback. What does this one want? The answer to the unspoken question was not long in coming. "The thing is that your Victoria is seriously ill, and she has not long to live," explained the attorney of the ex-wife of the businessman. "She wants to see you." To be honest, John didn't really want to see his ex-wife, but the last will of a dying man is a holy thing. And then, apparently, it's really important. The ex-wives hadn't seen each other in over 20 years, and John was amazed at the change in Victoria. At the divorce proceedings, he had been confronted by a stately brunette with smooth, slightly swarthy skin, radiant brown eyes, and attractive lips. Now John could not believe that this gaunt older woman, who looked at him with completely colorless eyes, was his first wife. "Well, hello, John," Victoria wheezed and coughed harshly. "Hello," John replied discreetly. "You wanted to see me?" "I've never seen you before," the ex-wife snorted, and John thought that their desires, or rather, their reluctance, coincided. He recognized her now, albeit vaguely. "But I want to repent to you." "Really?" "Yes, imagine that. I didn't expect it of myself, but they say it makes it easier to go to the afterlife. Have a seat." John sat down on the chair next to the bed of the dying ex-wife and prepared to listen. There wasn't much to tell. Victoria shrugged her thin shoulders. "Well, John, the late Jacob wasn't your son." "What do you mean?" Mickey was stunned. After a string of failed attempts to conceive, the ex-wife sighed. "A doctor I knew told me it was probably a matter of incompatibility and advised me to have a lover, so I took her advice. And eventually I did get pregnant. With a lover." "Oh God!" John exclaimed, wrapping his arms around his head. He'd been so proud of Jacob for looking like him, the idiot. Victoria must have picked a lover with dark eyes and hair. "Well, that's it," the dying wife said quietly, coughing again. "Well, thank you for your frankness." John nodded and after a little thought asked, "Is there anything I can do to help you? Medication or—" "I don't need anything," Victoria shook her head, "because you've already kept me like a queen. There's enough for the funeral. Now go with God. You've repented. Now you won't be afraid to die. Thank you for listening." John left his ex-wife's house depressed. You never know what to expect from a bitchy woman. Depends on the kind of woman, though. Selena, for instance, had it written all over her face, or Angelica. The only difference is what it said. Victoria had always been unpredictable, even, as it turned out, on death's doorstep. John remembered Jacob. He loved the boy like a native son and was proud of his accomplishments, of which, thankfully, there were many. Besides, Jacob had made a significant contribution to this business. But anyway, John has only one native son, Evan, who only a few days ago found out about his kinship with the entrepreneur. So maybe it's time to start paying back his son's debts. After all, release from the detention center and the return of little Archie from the orphanage is the least that John could do for Evan. So John went to a seemingly long-forgotten address. "Hi, Mallory," he said, smiling with just his eyes. "Hi, John," she nodded. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine. By the way, I'm sorry, I forgot to call you to thank you." "Thank you? For what?" John exclaimed in surprise. "For getting Evan acquitted." "Mallory, please, it's my duty as a father. Do you know what I came here for?" "Why did you come here?" "Let's start again," he said quietly, taking Mallory's hands. "But we're so old," she smiled. "Not at all," laughed John. "We're 18. Or have you forgotten?" "Thanks for reminding me." 3 months passed. The small village church was covered with greenery, and it was an incredibly beautiful landscape. In front of the priest stood a gray-haired Nulu couple, but they knew they were 18. "How beautiful Mallory is, isn't she?" Angelica whispered to the groom. "My mom is the most beautiful in the world." Evan immediately agreed. "Not counting you. You're my favorite." 2 weeks ago they were married. Angelica stayed at John's house because, thanks to her, John was able to expose the criminals and nail them to the wall. In addition, now Angelica became the daughter-in-law of an elderly businessman. So the question of housing for the newlyweds was solved. There was room for everyone in this spacious mansion. Julia looked at the newlyweds and was over the moon. They got rid of the hated Selena. Angelica and Evan adopted Julia. She had a brother, Archie, whom the girl loved with all her soul. This was quite enough for happiness, and now grandfather will marry a good woman. Despite her very young age, Julia realized that the family is the most valuable thing that a person has. And the fact that she was growing up was great. After the wedding, all went to a cozy rural restaurant, the owner of which was a good friend of John. The guests were welcomed by a hall full of fresh flowers and, of course, a beautifully set table. An elderly newlywed took the floor. "First of all, my dears, I suggest you thank fate for bringing us all together. Sometimes I think that all this might not have happened, and I feel sad, especially because Olenka and I would never have become husband and wife." "Well, enough already, old geezer," laughed Mallory. "We are together, and everything else is such nonsense." "That's right," said John approvingly. "And now I propose to drink to our happiness." Bitterly, Evan exclaimed, and the rest of the group joined in. "Now I'd like to ask for a moment of attention," exclaimed a friend of the groom, whose name was Mickey. The guests were silent, and Mickey came on stage and took out his violin from backstage and approached his old friend. "Dear friend, I remember you not only as a successful businessman and just a good man. I also remember you as a talented violinist. I suggest you remember your youth. Play us something." "I remembered my grandmother as a girl." John laughed. "No, guys, do you want my disgrace?" "Why would you want to be embarrassed? I'm sure you'll be fine." "John," Angelica winked slyly, "and remember how you told me that the hands will remember everything?" "Well, it looks like I can't get away with this," John said. "God help you. You're on." John took the violin in his hands as if it were a piece of fine crystal. The audience watched the elderly businessman, who never became a musician, and waited in awe for him to start playing. And he did. It was the same tune composed by Mallory, his first, and as it turned out, only love. John began to play timidly, as if reluctant, and then the old man sank into a veil of memories, and the melody sounded more and more confidently. Now his thoughts were in the place where he was young, in love, and full of plans. "Bravo!" shouted Mickey when John had finished playing. The blushing violinist bowed to the audience and began to play a cheerful medley. The audience clapped in time with the music. And then there were cries of bitter toast to love and anticipation of happiness, which only a man can dream of. Time flew inexorably. Evan and Angelica had a son, whom the couple named Billy. And 2 years after the birth of their son, Angelica proudly announced to her husband that the family was about to have a new addition. And not just an addition, but a whole twin. As it turned out, 2 girls. Just some kind of female battalion. Shook his head happy father. Well, giggled Angelica, beautiful ladies will be more only one. So, maybe after the birth of twin girls we'll try to equalize the number of ladies and gentlemen. Evan winked. God forbid. His wife splashed her hands. It wouldn't be a bad idea to have our daughters first. When John found out that he was going to become a grandfather again, he thought about buying a new house, a bigger one. As a result, this friendly family settled outside the city in a monumental mansion, stylized as a Boyer manor. Some of their friends and acquaintances said that the young people should live separately. However, Evan, Angelica, and their children liked to live together with their parents. After all, they were the most wonderful old people in the world. And then both families lived their own lives. John and Mallory traveled a lot, and if they were at home, they did not bother the young with advice and moralizing. Well, and the young people in turn tried not to upset the old people and do not bother them in vain. 3 years after the birth of twins Catherine and Elizabeth, Mallory seriously ill. The cancer was detected when there was nothing to be done, except to accept it. The old woman quietly passed away in her sleep, right on the night of Epiphany. She is well now, Angelica said quietly, looking at the calm, peaceful face of her old friend, and crossed herself. On the day of the funeral of the elderly musician, despite the frosts of baptism, it was warm and quiet. Flakes of snow were falling. John, aged from grief, did not shed a tear. No more tears, said the widower, watching his ex-wife being lowered into the ground. The elderly businessman threw a handful of earth and whispered, "Sleep well, my love. Our happiness was short, but real." A month later, John himself was gone. Grandpa couldn't do it without her, sobbed Julia, who was in her senior year of high school. She had so dreamed of inviting her grandfather to her graduation, but alas. A few days after John's 40th birthday, the children decided to sell the mansion. The maintenance of such a huge house was not cheap, and Evan and Angelica had to raise 5 children. In addition, this year Julia entered the institute, and it implied expenses, and Archie's enrollment was just around the corner. The buyer came along a couple months later. He was a wealthy older man, formerly a successful producer, now the owner of 2 restaurants. "I want to give the house to my doll," he winked at the Mallory couple. Evan and Angelica nodded absently. In truth, they didn't care who they sold to, as long as they sold. The children were at school, and the couple packed their bags, wondering how the joyous events of the house had been intertwined with the sad ones. And here's how it happens, Angelica thought. If I hadn't met Vanya and fallen in love, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't have come to work for John. We wouldn't have adopted Julia. Vanya might never have known who his father was. There's all sorts of don'ts, but history, as you know, does not bear the subjunctive mood. Philosophical thoughts interrupted the voice of her husband. "Angelica, what is it?" "Look what I found." Even stood by the closet, which he was preparing to dismantle, and pointed to a door in the wall. "A secret door." Angelica spluttered. "Exactly. It's crazy." The husband shook his head in surprise. "How long have lived here and did not even know about the existence of this door?" "Yes, I wonder what's in there. Let's go in and see for ourselves." Evan and Angelica entered the secret door. The room behind the secret door was dark, so they didn't immediately see what made them numb with terror. Goosebumps ran down each of the couple's backs. There were 3 human skulls on the shelf, and the room looked terribly dark. "Do you think they are real?" Angelique asked, trembling with fear, pointing at the skulls. "I have no idea," Evan said. "Hold on. I'm going to get a flashlight." "I'll go with you," said the wife hastily. "You coward. You'll chicken out." Angelica shivered. Julia, who had come back from school, entered the room. "What is this?" The girl exclaimed in surprise when she saw the secret door open. "And this, daughter, is a secret door," Evan answered. "Wow. What's behind the secret door?" Julia asked, looking through it, and immediately recoiled. "Oh, it's so dark." "Well, what's a flashlight for?" grinned her father. They entered the mysterious room, and when Evan shined the flashlight, all three of them gasped. Right in the middle of the room was a large chest. "I wonder what's in it," muttered the head of the family. "Probably gold and diamonds," Julia giggled. "Yeah, keep your pocket wide open," said Angelica. The chest, which was covered with cobwebs, was not locked, and when they jointly lifted the lid, they could not restrain a cry of amazement. "And you said—" "Keep your pockets wide open," said Julia, turning to her mother. There were indeed jewels in the chest. A lot of jewelry, including gold and diamonds, and there was a letter. Oh, it's grandfather's handwriting. Angelica took the letter and began to read it aloud. "My dear children, if you are reading this letter, you must have discovered a secret door. Now let me guess," John wrote, "you must be getting ready to sell the house because it costs a lot of money to maintain. Relax. These jewels I've collected over the years will save you from having to sell the house. It's up to the owner, of course, but I'd be very hurt if you did sell the house. It's sacred to me. I'd like to see more of John's generation grow up here. But of course, the choice is yours. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. I love you all very much. Your John." P.S. By the way, the skulls on the shelves are just a prop for mystery. So, what do you think? Angelica asked after finishing the letter. "Yes, grandfather loves special effects," Julia sighed. "His helpless state is worth it. Do you remember?" "How could I not remember?" grinned her mother. "I saw Mickey get out of bed and thought I was hallucinating. And now he surprised us even after his death. So what are we going to do with the house?" Evan spoke up. "The answer is obvious." Angelica smiled. "I'd be ashamed to sell it anyway. And it's not even about the jewelry." "Perhaps," agreed her husband. The doorbell rang. The restaurateur's producer and a young, glamorous woman who seemed vaguely familiar to Angelique appeared in the video eye. When the couple entered, she was surprised to recognize Selena, Mickey's former sister-in-law. "So this is your house?" Selena was surprised. She had changed over the years, but she was still pretty. Selena had cut her hair short and changed it from golden blonde to dark brown. She had also lost some weight, and if it weren't for the haughty expression on her face, Selena could be called a real beauty. In fact, she was, except that they were used to appreciating the beauty of the soul above all else. Judging by the unkind expression on Julia's face, the girl recognized her former stepmother as well. "I'm sorry," Angelica said, embarrassed, "but the house is not for sale." "What, kindergarten?" exclaimed the man, "then sold, then not sold. I was on my way from the city, by the way." "Yes, I understand," she nodded, "and we are ready to compensate you for the cost of travel." "What does money have to do with it?" The buyer grumbled with annoyance. "I really like the house, the aura is good, and look, maybe you're not satisfied with the price. I'm willing to pay more. I assure you it's not about the price," Angelique assured me. "Is it about me?" Selena gritted her teeth. "No, it's nothing personal," the former tutor shrugged. "It's just that something came up, and we changed our minds about selling the house." "I don't understand. Do you two know each other?" The man was confused. "We do," Angelica nodded, "but it has nothing to do with selling the house. As I said, it's nothing personal." The buyer, realizing there would be no deal, sighed disappointedly and said, "Well, too bad. Come on, Selena. We'll look for something else for you." Selena just shrugged her shoulders and the buyers left the mansion. As soon as the door closed behind them, all three of them laughed. "I still can't forget Selena's face," Julia laughed. "It was a sight to behold," Angelica agreed. "And Selena doesn't lose her way," she said ironically. "She's got herself a new rich guy. I even feel sorry for him. She's going to make him have an accident." Tears welled up in Julia's eyes. Of course, Evan loved her as his daughter, but no one could replace her father. When the girl remembered Selena, hatred embraced her with terrible force. Selena John was furious. It was such a great house, and this tutor confused all the cards. Besides, Selena had old scores to settle with Angelica. A fortune like that slipped through the cracks. And the years in prison, and all because of that hussy. And she and he had a good thing going. Who'd have thought that damn tutor was standing there, listening to their conversation and recording it on a tape recorder? Is she trying to get a rise out of you? Well, he who laughs. I wonder what made them change their mind about selling the house. Harvey, the restaurateur, said thoughtfully. Well, I don't know, shrugged Selena. I wonder, she thought, what did she and her hubby use to buy such a huge house? Or did old John dole it out? He'll do it. Selena already knew that her former father-in-law was in the kingdom of heaven, but she didn't know that the tutor's husband was John's own son. I don't think it's that simple. Harvey shook his head. It just can't be. When a man decides to sell his house, he needs money, or he's serious about moving. And then they change their mind overnight. No warning. Something's not right. We should do some research on this house. The young woman decided Harvey was probably right. Who knows? It might help Selena get even with Angelica. The restaurateur went home, and his beloved took out of the bar a bottle of his favorite cream liqueur, made himself comfortable on the couch, and plunged into the memories. Already in the 10th grade, Selena Kalevanova knew that appearance was her main trump card. She knew another thing. This trump card could help Selena to change her life for the better. After all, it was then that she, a girl from a poor family, fell in love with the son of a successful businessman, Jacob John. The guy offered her to date, and Selena immediately agreed. She imagined that she would live in a luxurious mansion and, of course, would not work. However, at the end of school, a rich dad sent Jacob to study abroad, and all dreams of a beautiful life collapsed overnight. Relax, Selena said to herself mentally. I'm a beautiful girl, and Jacob is not the end of the story. She had a new plan, which, by the way, seemed much more interesting. Of course, it would take more than a year to realize the plan, but for sure. Selena's plan was as follows. To begin with, the girl decided to enroll in technical school and learn the profession of accountant. Actually, with her ability to do math, she could go to university. But the higher institution was not suitable for Selena for one simple reason, because it was necessary to study there for 5 years, while the term of study in her chosen technical school was only 2 years. Waiting for a beautiful life for 5 years? No way, no way. After technical school, she will work a little in some firm, find a wealthy beau, and marry him legally. And then Selena will live a life of pure pleasure. My plan will work, thought the girl with delight. When she learned that she was enrolled in technical school, what else will happen? Selena studied well and was confidently going for a red diploma. You'll make a great accountant, said Emma, the accounting teacher, approvingly. Hopefully not for long, Selena thought. Work? What a bore. Well, she did not understand women who defended the right to work as a doctor, teacher, chemist, streetcar driver, and God knows who else. And when her friends told Selena that they wanted to work for pleasure, she wrinkled her nose as if she had a toothache. Where's the work and where's the fun? Selena snorted when Aubrey's classmate told her plans for her life. I don't know, she shrugged. Personally, I think I'm going to make work a pleasure. Socializing again. Do you see yourself as a hybrid of an incubator, a governess, and a doll from an intimate store? No, smiled the girl. I see myself as the beauty and pride of the house. The main thing is to move in the right direction. She only shook her head. Meanwhile, Selena's plan worked even after receiving her red diploma. She managed to get a job at a rather prosperous confectionery company. Selena was repeatedly offered to enter the correspondence department of the institute, and having studied, to take the position of technologist. But the young accountant categorically refused. After all, she had other plans for life. Finally, Selena smiled luck in the form of a new commercial director. Tony was single, and the young woman decided, here's my chance. And Selena did miss it. In the firm worked a lot of spectacular women, but the commercial director chose her, and not just chose, and called her to marry. The whole organization was celebrating the wedding. After the honeymoon in Paris came the harsh everyday life, and they turned out to be not as rosy as Selena had first thought. I've decided to quit, the young woman announced to her husband. What is it? Tony asked with a smile. Or do you want to make me happy? Selena understood perfectly well what her spouse meant. However, she preferred to pretend she didn't. To make you happy, she smiled back. I'm going to take care of the house and spoil you with home-cooked food. I assure you, I'll make it as good as in the restaurant. Tony stretched out disappointedly. Selena, I appreciate your eagerness to do housework, but I don't mind a woman working. Did you think I was planning on locking you away? I assure you, That is not the case. All right, Selena nodded, hiding her disappointment. Thank you. You're welcome, Tony replied, kissing her. I realized that most modern women don't want to be housewives. And Selena continued working at the company. Well, and what are you steamed? With a chuckle asked a friend Veronica. When Selena told about the conversation with her husband does not embarrass your freedom. Is that a bad thing? Didn't you say that the husband should support the family and the woman should take care of the house and herself? Well, I did, but my outlook on life has changed. Now, Selena, I'm all for equality. A golden cage isn't good either. Veronica was married to a businessman who was against her working and accordingly knew what she was talking about. However, her friend's words made no impression on Selena. All she knew was that she did not wish to work. Selena wanted to live a life of pleasure and shine at social events. And the golden cage? Well, there are other women living in it, and Veronica's just going crazy. As time went on, Selena realized that Tony just didn't respect women who didn't work. In fact, there was nothing to understand. Once he contemptuously called one of these women domestic, and Selena realized that in this marriage she had nothing more to catch. When the young woman talked about divorce, Tony was surprised, however, did not resist. Selena again launched into an active search for a wealthy Sujinogo. She studied dating sites from time to time. Friends introduced Selena to different men, but eventually she did it on her own. A chance meeting with a former lover in the restaurant of a business hotel became fateful. She decided that Jacob John is what she needs. The young, handsome widower was rich. The only thing that confused Selena was that Jacob had a daughter. But on the other hand, what could she do? No one forced her to love Juliet as if she were her own. It was enough to give the appearance of caring. Meeting Sosnowski, her father-in-law John's manager, turned Selena's life upside down. She realized that she had fallen in love, and it seems not without reciprocity. And so it proved to be. Harry turned out to be not only savvy, but also a greedy, calculating man. But most importantly, he was willing to do anything for Selena. That was what had prompted the manager's plan to eliminate first his son, then his father, and then the little Harris. Jacob's plan was a success, but his father's was a misfire. The doctors said John's body would recover in time, but Selena didn't believe it. As it turned out, she shouldn't have. I wonder when it happened. Selena thought sometimes when she was in places not so remote, because at first he didn't fake it. Does it matter? If it hadn't been for that damn tutor, Andre and I might have been able to finish what we started. The young woman was released on parole. Despite the fact that Selena returned not from the resort, she still looked beautiful, except she'd lost weight, which means that nothing prevents her from finding a new rich patron. Selena couldn't get a real job anyway, and she didn't want one, so it's back to the search. The first thing, she decided to change her appearance. Selena cut off her long blonde hair and dyed it a darker color. Looking in the mirror, she was pleasantly surprised. The new hairstyle and hair color transformed Selena. She looked younger and her face looked more interesting. Now it was just a matter of looking for an object to build a bright future. Her requirements for a candidate for a life partner were simple: man must be single and rich. The first thing the young woman bought after leaving the colony was an inexpensive smartphone. After returning from the hairdresser's shop, Selena began to concentrate on studying dating sites and was disappointed. It felt like the most flawed men were sitting on them. What's so surprising, though, she thought. A decent man doesn't need dating sites. With nothing to do, Selena logged onto a social networking site and a post caught her eye. A new restaurant owned by Harvey's former producer needed a bartender. No, Selena wasn't interested in the job, but the owner. When she was married to Jacob, they had gone to the concert of a well-known musical group whose producer was Harvey. This band was not Harvey's only child, and no wonder. His entrepreneurial spirit was legendary in the city, so now he owns a restaurant. After typing Harvey into the search engine, Selena almost jumped for joy. The restaurant owner was divorced, so what is not a chance to improve the financial situation and at the same time arrange a personal life? Unfortunately, there was no money to spend in this definitely not cheap restaurant. However, there was an idea. Selena put on a small black dress, left from her past life, Black lacquered shoes made of bright, spectacular makeup, and taking a clutch in the tone of shoes, gracefully left the house. She could not afford a cab, and the young woman went, as she hoped, to meet the life from which she did not want to get rid of. "What shall we order?" the waiter asked. "A salad with mussels and avocado, a glass of grappa, and perhaps a fruit platter," Selena replied with a dazzling smile. "Well, fine choice," nodded the guy and stepped away from the table. "That's for sure." The young woman grinned to herself, not referring to dinner at all. It was just under an hour before the restaurant closed, and Selena couldn't help but notice the slanted glances of the bartender and waiter in her direction. A couple minutes later, the latter came to her table and asked, "Will you order something else?" "You see, there's a situation." Selena hesitated. "What's the matter?" The waiter was wary, guessing what it was. "The thing is that well, I forgot the money," she answered, embarrassed. "I would like to solve this issue directly with Harvey. But maybe you could call someone and borrow some money. You see, it's getting late." "Well, who am I going to call now?" "Well, Harvey and I know each other a little. I think that would be easier," Selena said more firmly. "Well, all right," the waiter replied with a little hesitation. Harvey arrived about 20 minutes later. "I'm listening to you," he said in an impassive voice, not without interest, I must say, looking at Selena. "You see, I forgot my money," she smiled shyly, "and in order to avoid conflict, I decided to address you directly." "Aha," nodded the owner of the place. "Well, commendable, but you know what?" Selena looked questioningly at Harvey, and he said exactly what she expected. "This dinner will be on the house." "How?" The young woman pretended to be surprised. "And for what merits?" "And consider it a component," said Harvey, and winking added, "personally for me." That day Harvey drove her home. They exchanged phone numbers and started dating. Harvey turned out to be a generous and gallant chancellor. Too bad he didn't ask her to marry him. But he once complained about Selena's living conditions and promised to buy her an apartment. Or should it be a house? Harvey asked with a smile. "A house is great," Selena nodded approvingly, remembering John's mansion. "Well, that's a deal." The house the beau had chosen was much cooler than John's mansion. Selena, seeing his photo, was even confused. "What am I going to do alone in such a huge house?" "I think you and I will find something to do," Harvey said meaningfully, and the next day they went to make a deal. When Selena saw the lady of the house, she was surprised. However, she was much more surprised that the sellers refused the deal. At first, Selena thought it was because of her, but Harvey convinced her otherwise. And then she thought it was strange too. After a couple of shots of delicious liquor, the young woman felt sleepy. Selena gladly laid down on the cool silk sheets and instantly fell asleep. The next morning, she received a call from Harvey. "Kitten, what have I found out?" he exclaimed. "Yes," trying to make her voice sound indifferent, Selena said. "And what did you find out?" "According to rumors, there might be a treasure hidden in this house." "What nonsense?" snorted the young woman. "Maybe it's nonsense, maybe it's not. The thing is, there were legends about this house. Rumors, perhaps. Either way, it should all be checked out." Selena sighed. Truth be told, it didn't sound very plausible. But what the hell was the point? There's no smoke without fire. "Evan, I have a feeling someone's been in the house," Angelica told her husband. "Why would that be?" Evan asked. "When I left for work yesterday, I closed the window. When I came home this evening, the window was open." "But maybe you hadn't closed the window after all," he suggested. "Evan, do I look like an old sclerotic?" "Well, why would you look like an old sclerotic? Maybe you meant to close the window. But in your haste, you forgot, and you thought you closed it." "Maybe so," Angelica said, but there was no hint of confidence in her voice. She remembered perfectly well that she had closed the window. 3 days after this conversation, Evan was forced to take his wife's words more seriously. He noticed that the very closet behind which the secret door had been moved. But Evan remembered that he had pushed the closet in quite tightly. Something was telling him. Was this related to their attempt to sell the house? Why? There was only one theory that came to mind, and Evan didn't like it. Before she went to bed, Angelica said to her husband, "Evan, can't we get rid of these jewels? Well, we lived without them. Now you're a successful businessman. Things are going well, and maybe you think you were looking for jewelry too, he sighed. There was no point in playing the silent game when it was obvious. And how do you propose I get rid of them? Evan asked, puzzled. And then don't forget that we didn't sell the house because of them. Business is business, but you can't get by without a financial cushion these days. I understand, sighed the young woman, but I can feel it in my bones that these jewels will bring us a lot of problems. So turn them into money. What's the problem? In fact, my father left them to us as an inheritance, didn't he? So, Angelica sighed again, but somehow it's all. I don't even know how to explain it. I'll put it this way. I have a bad feeling about this. Why don't we donate it to some orphanage or hospice? Angelica, I'll let you in on a secret. I do too. But then we have to do something about it. Without them, we can't afford to keep the house. You know that. I think I know what to do, Angelica said slowly. Well, it's really not a big deal. Harvey, I have found out everything. Excitedly exclaimed Harvey, the man who from time to time rendered Harvey specific services. There is a secret door in this house. Well, and the treasure that has been talked about, does it really exist? The room behind the secret door was empty, the handyman said. Apparently the treasure had been hidden away, if it was there at all. So why the hell are you saying you found out? And come back as soon as you know something concrete. Understood. Harvey nodded nonchalantly. Come on, Harvey grimaced and waved his hand. It's obvious what's been stashed away, he thought. Harvey could feel in his bones that there was a treasure, but was it in the house now? Everyone in John's house was sleeping peacefully. Only Julia was awake. The clock was already past midnight, but the girl did not sleep a wink. It had been 3 months since Julia had fallen in love with a boy who came to the parallel class from another school. The guy was really incredibly good-looking, tarry hair, piercing blue eyes, and Apollo's physique. Unusual looks, Julia thought, looking at his photo on the social network. It's just a pity that the boy didn't pay any attention to her. And why would he need Julia, when this dama was chasing almost the whole female half of the school? She, of course, God had not hurt her looks either, but one girl more, one less for such a handsome boy obviously did not matter. Under such unhappy thoughts, Julia, hoping to fall asleep, slowly drank a glass of milk, and suddenly she was horrified to see how 2 men in dark clothes and masks approached the cellar, where they kept pickles, jams, and homemade wine. In the hands of one of the intruders was a pluck, with which he skillfully broke the lock, after which the men climbed inside. With horror, the girl could not move from her seat. It suddenly seemed to Julia that if she did so, the criminals would hear, and then, shrieking with terror, the girl ran toward her parents' bedroom, where she ran into Billy. You heard the rustling from the cellar too? Whispered his brother. And even saw everything, Julia whispered back in a tragic voice. I was sitting in the kitchen, and there were 2 men there, and they, from excitement and fear the girl began to stammer, but still finished. There were 2 men in the cellar. So what are we waiting for? We have to wake up the parents and call the police, the boy said firmly, and banged on the door of Evan and Angelica's bedroom. The first to wake up was the mother. She had been a restless sleeper lately. What's wrong? Angelica asked in a sleepy voice. There's someone in the cellar, the son whispered excitedly. Julia called the police. Already? Laughed Evan, who also woke up and stretched his eyes. But Mr. Harvey can't wait to get his father's jewels. So they're in the cellar now? Billy exclaimed. The wail of a police siren prevented the parents from answering. All 4 of them went downstairs. Did you call the police? One of the officers asked. Yes, nodded Evan. What happened? There are 2 criminals in our cellar right now, replied the homeowner. Where is the cellar? Over there, Evan pointed, and the law enforcement officers rushed in that direction. Hey, is there anyone here? One of the policemen shouted, and the other shone a flashlight into the cellar. There were 2 men lurking in the corner. Come out at once, shouted the policeman, and the intruders had no choice but to obey. Archie, Catherine, and Elizabeth came down into the hallway. Why can't you sleep? Angelica asked, more for the sake of order. You can't sleep, Archie muttered. What's the matter? I think it's obvious, Evan grinned. People came for the jewelry. So they're in the cellar? Patience, boys, replied the father in a mysterious tone, and at that moment one of the policemen entered the house and invited the couple to come with them. So, who sent you? Asked the investigator Anthony, but the criminals were silent as fish. Who is the customer? I asked. The thieves continued to remain silent. Do you have any idea who it could be? The investigator turned to the couple. Actually, I do, Evan nodded. It's probably Harvey, the owner of the restaurants. Are you sure? Yes, we recently planned to sell the mansion and he was the only potential buyer. Of course, theoretically, it could be anyone, but I don't believe in such coincidences. So Anthony asked, turning to the night spies again, is it really Harvey? You realize it's going to come out. I told you not to sign up for this, muttered one of the criminals, and Angelica only then noticed that the boys were still young, not much older than Julia. I wonder what made them do it, she thought. So it was really Harvey? The investigator repeated his question. Yes, admitted the second intruder. The couple arrived home in the morning. The kids were awake. They were hungry for details. There's nothing to tell, shrugged the head of the family. Those bastards were sent by Mr. Harvey, but they will be used as witnesses in the case. Why? Julia asked. They're just young kids, Evan said. What did they have to do with anything? They weren't even Harvey's people. They were just kids. Kids from dysfunctional families who wanted to make what they thought was easy money. How would they know there was fake jewelry in the cellar? Fake? The children exclaimed in unison. Exactly, smiled Angelica. When it became clear to the Mallorys that someone was looking for the secret door and obviously the jewelry, they decided to take emergency measures. Angelica took cheap costume jewelry imitating diamonds, pearls, and other precious stones, and the couple substituted the originals for glass. Well, and the real jewelry is in a safe deposit box at the train station. She finished her story with a smile. It was all our mom's idea, Evan said, putting his arm around his wife. Her idea. Mom is our head. Elizabeth yawned. Well, ahead, said Angelica modestly. Let's go to bed. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Thank God, tomorrow is Sunday. Harvey, asked the policeman, a representative man in a luxurious satin robe, who had just brewed a good portion of coffee. Yes, that's me, nodded the restaurateur. What can I do for you? You are under arrest on a charge of organizing a crime, replied the policeman nonchalantly. What nonsense, exclaimed Harvey. I am a respected man in the city, a businessman, not some thief in the law. One doesn't prevent the other, said the second policeman nonchalantly, and added, Harvey, you'll have to come with us. You have 10 minutes to pack. I want a lawyer. One phone call was not canceled, the police officer noted. After hearing about the arrest of a high-profile suitor, Selena was ready to throw down. It's that damn tutor again. How long would that thing stay in her way? Selena knew it was pointless to retaliate. She would only hurt herself. The young woman was not involved in this case, so it was better not to wait the storm while it was still quiet. It's better to look for a new wealthy man. She's not getting any younger. You should go to work, said Veronica. Well, you're a smart woman. Aren't you tired of waiting for the weather? Who needs me with a criminal record? Selena sighed. I'm certainly not going to get a job in my specialty. They were sitting in a summer cafe on the seafront, and Selena noticed that her friend was looking around, probably afraid that some of her husband's men will catch her with an ex-con. She thought with a wry chuckle, and she wasn't far from the truth. It's unlikely that you'll get a job in your specialty, Veronica nodded, but you could get a job in a bar or a kitchen worker. Selena interrupted irritably. Thank you for your good advice, or I wouldn't have guessed without you. Well, suit yourself. I'm sorry, but I have to go. Her friend resolutely got up from the table and walked away. Selena knew they would never see each other again. What if I go abroad? A thought struck her, by the way. I have some money, enough for the first time. And here, it seems, I have nothing to catch. Did you not know that this house has long been rumored to have a treasure in it? Incredulously asked the investigator during the pre-trial conversation. Even I had heard about it. No, Evan replied. All we know is that my father bought jewelry and, as it turned out, put it in a chest. Not all of the jewelry was purchased by your father, Anthony said. A few pieces were lying there much earlier. The house had originally belonged to a rich merchant, then to some other people, and when they died it had been empty for several years. "Tell me, please, do we have to pay something for finding these ornaments?" Angelica inquired. "A tax for some percentage. By law, you have to pay for something that didn't belong to you," Anthony explained. "But as I explained, it's only a few pieces, and a special investigation will reveal which ones. So you won't lose too much." "That's not the point," Mallory said with a sigh. "We just wanted to keep things fair. You know, we're even planning to donate some of the money from the jewelry sale to the orphanage." "Well, it's the right thing to do," said the investigator approvingly. "You'll do a really good deed. And I, for my part, will try to make sure that you pay the minimum." The producer-restaurateur got 5 years in prison. They were glad that justice had been served, but that's all. There was no gloating at all, except that there was anger at the thought of a grown-up, respectable man using young, stupid boys to do his evil deeds. "It's because of such Harvey and his kind that young people stumble," Evan sadly stated. He remembered how many years ago he had been framed and wondered how many unjustly convicted people there were. As the couple walked out of the courthouse, Evan suddenly asked, "Angelica, do you remember your father and mother's wedding?" "Of course I remember," she replied with a smile. "But why do you ask?" "Because I want to suggest that you do the same. Let's get married." "This is a very serious step," Angelica said slowly, looking at her husband intently. Evan exclaimed, "I think we have proved to each other and to everyone who knows us that we are not serious. So what about the wedding? Are you in?" "Yes," whispered the woman, and tears of happiness glistened in her beautiful and so dear eyes. The small, recently renovated village church was still covered with greenery. But the landscape became even more luxurious, because now, after many years, it was ennobled by landscape design. In front of the bishop stood a couple of mature age, but in their hearts each of them was no more than 18. True love knows no age. Behind the married servants of God, Evan and Angelica, stood their 5 children and their family friend Harvey Mickey. In spite of his advanced age, he still ran the village restaurant, and he did it well. "Well, now," Harvey Petrovich said at the end of the wedding, and everyone accepted his invitation with pleasure. And again the hall, fragrant with fresh flowers, shouts of Gorko, and wishes of love and happiness. And then Angelica played on the violin the very melody, with which, in fact, and began the history of this large and united family. Somewhere out there on the earth, Selena was wandering in search of another rich man, and restaurateur Harvey was serving his sentence. And here, in a cozy hall, people enjoyed the atmosphere of happiness and peace. And John and Mallory looked down on them from heaven and were genuinely happy. Now the late entrepreneur John could be at peace. The mansion with the secret would never be sold, and its walls would be voiced by more than one more child's voice.